Witcher 3. A very similar thing, another more orchestral soundtrack with that. Very iconic to me because of the like almost folk sort of spirit that's it moves throughout the entire soundtrack. The female vocals in a lot of the standout songs, the sort of the iconic themes of The Witcher 3, all centered around this very epic folky sound. And I like it because, watching some of the behind the scenes of the making of the soundtrack, there's a lot of, just random musicians and bands from over there in, what's the name of the country that's in Poland, gosh. A lot of local talent that they brought in, and some of them, they didn't really set out to create a specific sound or anything like that. A lot of the people that originally came in were people that couldn't even read music. They just sort of improvised and made things up. And I sort of identified with that as someone that used to play in a lot of bands and stuff. That's a lot of how we would write our music. Is someone might come in with an idea or like a riff or something like that, and then we would just jam on it and just see what happens. And that was like always the fun to me of creating music. And so it was cool to see like a lot of the original ideas of the soundtrack of Witcher 3 sort of came about by just people sitting around and kind of doodling on their instruments and jamming and then like playing off of each other and stuff like that. So it wasn't even necessarily written in the traditional sense. Now that later on they sort of add in the more symphony orchestral parts to it, but some of the core pieces of the album were just these little disparate sort of musical ideas, and then they just kind of tweaked them and built around that. And by the end of it, it sounds like really professional and layered. But there's a lot of cool because I'm a guitar player myself, and I play a little bit of drums too. I don't really play anymore, but so I like stringed instruments. I like that kind of sound in my music. There's a lot of like folky string, weird. I can't even remember the names of all the sort of weird instruments they use in this, but it's super cool, and it achieves this really unique sound, even in the space of like orchestrated soundtracks where, if you've played the game, there's plenty of iconic themes and tracks from The Witcher 3 that just really stand out to me and really like just set the tone and the mood for that game that just completely fits with everything that game does. And I think it just kind of pulls it all together.
I would agree. Like Witcher 3 has a very unique sound to its soundtrack, and when I hear any of those instruments, it just makes me remember like Geralt. Like I just think of him, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of synonymous with him, because obviously I don't listen to folk music or any of that stuff, but it's just I think of The Witcher when I hear that type of music and those instruments.
Yeah, like whenever I think of The Witcher, I think first off, one of the greatest games of all time. But then I think about Geralt, and I think about the world, and I just think about the soundtrack. Like if you just say Witcher 3 to me, I think about Geralt and the soundtrack immediately, and those female vocals throughout, those little like kind of almost like chanting type stuff, and I just and then I start getting like, I just want to go run and play this game right now, because that's how strongly the music ties it all together for me.
They should have had you in the recording studio. You have a voice of an angel. Didn't you record the Halo theme? Wasn't that you?
Yeah. Oh, that was all me. I mean, I didn't want to like put it out there, because I didn't want to like, I didn't want to brag, but that was pretty much me. Did all that. So the next pick for me is the Journey soundtrack. Now, I don't know. Have either of you guys played Journey?
I did.
I have listened to the band.
Okay.
Is that what you're referring to?
Not exactly. It's a little bit different. But no, Journey was this indie game that came out last generation on the PS3. And if you haven't played it, it's a tremendous game. It's a short little game that you can beat in like 2 hours, but it's one of the most moving experiences I've ever had with a video game. There's no speech in it. It's just you interacting with the world, and it's hard to explain why it's so emotionally evocative, but part of it is the soundtrack. And what's interesting about the soundtrack, it was written by Austin Wintory, and he's done other games like the Banner Saga stuff, the Order 1886, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and Abzu and stuff like that. But what was cool about this soundtrack is that after it was released, it actually reached the top 10 of the iTunes soundtrack charts in more than 20 countries. It also reached position 116 on the Billboard sales charts. And then in December of 2012, Journey received a Grammy nomination for Best Score for like soundtrack and visual media, becoming the first video game score to receive a Grammy nomination. So it's even been accepted in the greater music sort of appreciation circles as a real important body of work. I love the soundtrack. I used to listen. It's one of the few soundtracks that I listen to just like outside of a game. I'm the type of person where I enjoy the soundtracks while I'm playing a game. They sort of add to the experience of a game, but it's very rare that I want to listen to video game soundtracks outside of the game. And this is one that I'll put on every now and then to sort of, I don't know, it kind of just like chills me out. Like I used to have this job where I would have to flip flop my schedule every week, like midweek, and get up like super early, like 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I would try to do things to help myself like fall asleep. And this is a very soothing soundtrack to listen to. And I would read a book while I was listening to it. And so it's just a very touching, very awesome soundtrack.
You know what? For all the accolades that you just mentioned, I don't remember any of the music. Like, to be honest, I don't remember any of it.
So, just to jump in, Don't Stop Believing was one of the more famous songs on the Journey soundtrack.
I think I heard it on the radio today.
Yes, I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's why I got all this recognition. I mean, it's iconic music. I mean, Don't Stop Believing is like, if you don't know what that is and you listening to that on a regular basis, then like you're not a normal human being.
Yeah, I mean that, and When You Love a Woman. Oh man, those are classics.
Exactly, but no, I mean it's a very standard video game orchestral soundtrack. Like it's not distinct in any specific way. It's just very of that type of soundtrack, the type that would be normally set to a movie or something like that. And so that's why I got more recognition, I think, because it was like your more traditional orchestral soundtrack. And I think the fact that, sort of Journey was this weird little indie hit that, it was about the length of a movie, you know what I mean? So I think it just sort of hit all these specific tent poles and just got a lot more attention. That's when sort of I think video game music and stuff like that and these little indie titles were starting to really take off in more of the public space, where people were starting to recognize that, hey, video game music is like a legit thing. And so this was right around that time when that happened. Like I said, it's a very traditional score. So I think that's why it got more picked up and more notoriety than your typical video game soundtrack would. But I don't even really understand all the reasons why it happened. But I just thought it was a neat aside to throw in about how it got picked up and was nominated for a Grammy and stuff like that, because it's pretty significant for a video game.